Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Jay Lee Day, so we're taking a look at his first creator-owned series in the early 90s, published by Image Comics. This is Hellshock, issue number 1, cover dated July 1994. By this point, Jay Lee's done a lot of work for Marvel. He did Namor, he did Spider-Man, he's worked for Rob Liefeld, Extreme Studios doing Youngblood Strikefire with the Chapel story, and he's even done work for Homage Studios, which I think at this point was still called Aegis Studios, maybe early on, that's what they were called, right? For Jim Lee, he's done the Wildcats trilogy, which I've just recently reviewed. All of those you can check in the archives of the Big Baby Reviews. They're there, and you can have a look if you're interested. And I gotta say, I had a lot of anticipation for the series originally when it was going to come out. I was about 13 years old, and I was very disappointed by it at the time. Got issue 1 and 2 and kind of stopped there because it really wasn't my thing, and I'll be pointing out in this review why, because going through the book again, all the reasons were pretty obvious. Starting off with the cover. So I feel like this is a good example of the height of the use and abuse of Photoshop in the early 90s. And unfortunately, this cover was a victim of that. The coloring on the inside is actually pretty good, but this cover here just doesn't do it for me. Up to this point, we'd seen a lot of ads in Wizard Magazine, and Hellshock had been hyped. And we had a lot of cool artwork in those ads by Jay Lee, which are in this book as well at the end. So we'll look at those as well, compare it with the cover. And when I got the first issue and got this cover here right away, I gotta say I was already disappointed by what I saw there. So first of all, it's not even, I mean, there's some artwork involved obviously in this, but this is basically a photo cover that's been modified, right? This is an actual model's face here with a lot of Photoshop elements added on top that really, to me, scream kind of the excess of Photoshop coloring in the early 90s. This kind of blurry fire going through his body here. Something else, the use of the flare and the lighting effects and stuff, and also just the coloring on the logo, which really just kind of highlights the middle of it. And you know, we lose the H, the E, and the L here pretty much in the black here. So you know, the one thing you want to make sure is your title is legible and clear and at least contrasting with the artwork, and just kind of a fail here. So, you know, from far away, you might think this comic is called Le Show or something, but it is Hellshock, but that logo being obscured is kind of a problem for me. Another thing too, I will say, even as a kid, as a 13-year-old, I was starting to get into The Crow. The Crow movie was coming out, and Hellshock to me just looked like pretty much, I wouldn't say exactly a copy or an analog, but pretty close. He was definitely stealing a lot of the aesthetic and vibe and the gothic feel of The Crow for Hellshock. Listen, Jay Lee at this point in time is still a very young guy, so I'm not going to expect him to do his, you know, most amazing life's creation when he's, you know, 19, 20, maybe 21 years old. I would think to create a character that's lasting and has impact, you got to be a little bit older, have a bit more experience. And that's probably why Hellshock didn't stick around for too long. And as well, you'll see there's some differences already in his artwork. The style is changing. Some stuff is okay, and other stuff I'm not so much into. But enough of that. Let's crack her open, have a look inside. So, story, art, Jay Lee, colors, Jose Villarrubia. I see a lot of his posts on Facebook, going back through his career, doing the coloring for Jay Lee. At a certain point, Jay Lee just kind of decided that he would be his main colorist. And that lasted, I don't know if that's still going on, but it sure lasted for a long time. Lettering, Richard Starking's Comic Craft. And I wonder if maybe this cover was done by Jay Lee, and not Jose Villarrubia, because I don't feel like these are his types of colors. Definitely what we're going to see inside the book is more representative, I think, of his work generally on Jay Lee. And as you'll see, the style of art changes a little bit here. I would say there's almost more influence now from the Bill Sienkiewicz kind of style and even the Dave McKean kind of stuff. It's almost like Jay Lee here is kind of trying to mix a little bit of, you know, superhero books, Image books, and Vertigo books is what I kind of get the vibe from here, but nothing wholly original. Starting off here, artwork wise, I'm pretty sure these are actual like handprints and paint. So maybe done in white. You know, I've talked a lot about how Jay Lee uses the white medium a lot, definitely for these lines here and this spackle going through these pages. And I definitely feel like this could almost be, you know, I don't think this is drawn. I think this is actually someone dipping their hands in paint and just putting white paint down. And then Jose probably came in and added this red here. So starting off with the vertical image panels, I would call them. They're a staple of Image books. And, you know, again, this to me just signals this book is going to be quite different probably from what you're expecting. And again, has more of a Vertigo kind of aesthetic than anything else here. And not much story in this book right away. And one of the big disappointments is, and even as a kid, was that this issue was very short. It's only 14 pages, which is kind of odd for a first issue kind of introduction of a character. You would think you'd at least try to go for the standard 22 pages or even more than that for a first issue. But yeah, JAE Lee just comes at it with 14 pages. And that's why, you know, again, disappointed by that, and we're not getting a lot of information about the character in this first issue here. So story-wise, like I said, we've got this kid and someone trying to get into the door here. We don't know exactly who he is and how he relates to Hellshock. We'll find out probably another issue, but not in this one. Real quick though, already the representation is toned down a little bit more, right? The proportions and stuff. Obviously, I know this is a kid, so I don't think JAE Lee would be giving him those, you know, crazy kind of Simon Bisley proportions. But there's definitely, the aesthetic is the same, right? The dark, the splatter, the inking style. But there's definitely more of a illustrative feel, and I feel like he's aiming a little bit for some realism in the depiction of his characters. And right away we get a shot here. You know, I've talked about how JAE Lee does pretty much minimal backgrounds most times. I do feel like most of this background here, at least this section for sure, where we see outside, is definitely photo referenced, or even, you know, maybe the photo is scanned in Photoshop wise and then messed around with the levels and stuff to make it look a little more contrasty. That's definitely the sense I get here. And even this door handle, I feel like, is photocopied and statted all the way throughout as it gets bigger here, which, you know, I have nothing against, but definitely using more you know, Photoshop techniques, I think, to create the art, as opposed to just pure art on the page. And yeah, so we turn, you know, to see the door getting smashed in, and more examples of what I definitely think are photo referenced backgrounds that we're getting here. Maybe one of the reasons we're getting more backgrounds in this Hellshock series is exactly because, you know, it's a little more expedient to use these pictures, maybe ink over them or just modify them and play around with them to get the textures and the aesthetic that he wants in Photoshop. So story-wise, not much going on. We're introduced to a couple of sisters here, and I don't mean just ladies, but actual nuns, right? They're in a church, and already with the depiction of the I was going to say nurses, the nuns here is the word I was looking for. You can already see a slightly, again, the aesthetic is the same, but the proportions and, you know, the stuff is definitely toned down to what I would definitely deem for JAE Lee a more realistic style. And so one nun points out to the other one, someone's here, and we get our first kind of glimpse of Hellshock. And I mean, again, tell me that's not like a Crow kind of aesthetic, right? The dark figure with the long hair standing in front of the window, like, you know, the candles and stuff, all of that to me screams gothic, and it's very Crow-like. But we're not getting Hellshock right away. We're just getting the main character. I forget his name here. We get, you know, I don't know if this, again, double page splash was needed for the shot here. Maybe just a regular splash would have been more than enough. So kind of overdoing it with the double page splash, I feel. And there's definitely, again, more of a, even more, he already had this kind of vibe, but more of a painterly kind of look to the artwork, even before the colors. Still using, again, that white medium everywhere you can see. And I definitely feel like this background, once again, is a photo that he's thrown in there. And we get a shot that the priest here, I'm going to assume is dead, right? There's just kind of a, I guess you'd define that as a halo of blood around his face and his head here. Not necessarily realistically rendered here, just kind of to make it obvious, I guess, that he's dead, or at least that he's bleeding. And then we move on and we're introduced to some of our, well, I guess our secondary character here. We never get his name, right? I don't think. Oh, no, he says it here. My mistake. So Danik Height, and he's a police detective. Still, again, pretty much the JAE Lee aesthetic, but definitely toned down in the proportions, right? The 3/4 still kind of looks the same, but as you can tell, this character has definitely more realistic human proportions. And using those photo backgrounds here clearly, especially when it comes to cars and stuff, I don't feel like these are drawn. I feel like these are just photos that he manipulated and probably played with the levels and the contrast and stuff. I mean, I don't hate it. It kind of works. And I think what ties it together really is the colors by Jose Villarrubia. Some interesting choices. Like, I don't know if I would have gone with this yellow here for the contour of the car and the steering wheel, but I think it works really well as kind of a reflective kind of effect. It's got almost like a neon kind of psychedelic effect that I kind of like. You know, the yellow and the blue for some reason, I just, color combination I like. There's a lot of blue in this issue, right? It's pretty dark. And so I thought this sequence was kind of funny. Even the interior of the car here, I definitely think, not in this one here. Okay, maybe he got the negative space for the car or something from a picture, but in this one here, it's definitely photo reference, the whole interior. Maybe even drawing the silhouette of a figure that's already in that picture there. So I just thought this panel was just funny, kind of storytelling wise, because he talks to the nuns from inside the car. It just feels a bit disconnected. Maybe I would have waited for this bit of dialogue in the panel where he's walking out of the car and maybe move that over to when he's walking into the church. Just seems kind of weird that he says, "I'm Detective Danik Height. Are you the one who registered the complaint?" from inside the car to the nuns. Just an odd storytelling choice. And all these backgrounds, again, for sure, of the church are pictures. Back to our little kid here, who's being creeped on now by some sort of hobo, I guess, maybe from Spawn, I don't know. And he's telling the kid that he's got some secrets. Matter of fact, I can tell you got a very big secret of your own, but we're not going to get that solved in the first issue. So just building a little bit of story there with this kid character. Here's about the most, I guess, the piece of art that's most reminiscent of, JAE Lee before or prior this Hellshock series. The exaggerated kind of expression on his face, the inking and stuff, the kind of gnarled, twisted finger. This to me is a bit more, at this point, I guess what I would call older school JAE Lee. He's definitely going for a new aesthetic here. Again, the kid, the way he's represented, definitely more realistic than we've seen from JAE Lee before. And even here with the silhouette, the proportions, nothing's, he's got small kid hands and stuff. Kind of weird in this one is, I just gonna point this out, is that we see one eye but not the other. So I thought that was just a weird kind of choice, almost oddly. If you can almost think he's like a Cyclops if you're not seeing the other 3/4 bit. So a bit of an odd choice. Either no eyes or both eyes, I guess, is what I would have done there. So once again, kid gets scared away, hides in a sewer pipe, and that's basically where we're going to leave him for now. Back to the church. We've got our detective here kind of looking around, the idea that he's got a flashlight here looking at the priest. We got some kind of horrible dialogue here. "Well, Padre, I hope you're in heaven, because from down here you look like hell." That's a pretty easy one there. No signs of a struggle, no bloody trails, not a single clue to go on. And then boom, we get a quick shot of our hero Hellshock kind of on his knees back there. And then you turn the page, we've got the detective kind of not yet confronting him, but walking up to him. And that's basically issue 1. That's, it's to be continued. 14 pages, really not a lot. To me, as I said, as a kid, even now, just really not enough to get me excited. But I was kind of an Image zombie back then. So I figured, I still kind of like JAE Lee's art. I'll give it a chance. I remember buying issue number 2, and that's basically where I stopped. For the reviews, I do have all 4 issues, so I'll be going through them. Issue 3 and 4, I've never gone through. So those are a mystery to me still, and we'll see how well the series picks up from issue 1, but kind of a boring, slow start to the Hellshock series. So these are the ads that I was talking about that you would see in mostly Wizard magazine that I thought were very evocative. You can see right away there's a slight style change for JAE Lee, not quite as exaggerated, proportions a little more realistic. And again, I didn't hate the look of Hellshock. I think the idea of the cross on his face and that the whole design of it is pretty cool all around. But, definitely way too reminiscent of the Crow, who again was very much in the zeitgeist in 93, 94 with the movie and stuff. And it just seems odd that you would create a character that's so close to the Crow. I guess maybe trying to ride the wings of the Crow's success or something. 2 more cool shots. Again, like here's maybe somewhere where the art I feel is better integrated with the computer coloring. But this Photoshop fire was never my thing, and aesthetically not the most pleasing, I find. But yeah, I mean, he was definitely creating some cool looking art there, which again just made it all the more disappointing when you read the actual comic. Even this shot here, pretty cool with some sort of angel tattoo, or back in the day I was like, is that Tinkerbell from Peter Pan? I wasn't quite sure, but definitely still using all of his tricks, right, with the white medium and the splatter and stuff. And, you know, even though the proportions are more subdued, the aesthetic is completely JAE Lee. And then, even as a kid, I thought this was pretty odd to throw this in. Here's a look at the original Hellshock Tale, which has subsequently been banished to hell. Well, it hasn't really been banished to hell. It's been published in the first issue. So kind of an odd choice to want to establish a story, to not, you know, do a full story, only do 14 pages, and then to kind of compensate for it with these ad pinups, and then the original kind of, I think there's 7 pages of the original Hellshock story, which would not actually be the first Hellshock story. So again, find it really weird that he threw this in to the first issue for us to have a look at. It just kind of creates confusion because basically you have 2 versions of the same issue in the first issue. So odd choice. This is something, to me, it's interesting, but you know, you keep that for the trade paperback, or maybe even for the last issue, the miniseries, that could have worked. But in the first issue, you basically have 2 first issues here, and he's like saying, yeah, this is my crappier, not so great version, which I gotta say, art-wise, is to me a little bit better and a little more evocative of the style I was expecting for JAE Lee in this series. So looking at this here, you'll see the proportions, like the you know, the look like the crow once again is so obvious here. And we're getting more old school kind of JAE Lee proportions. I think overall not quite as exaggerated as Chapel or the Wild Cat stuff. And the background here, definitely drawn and not photo referenced. So I think those are some of the differences aesthetically with what he originally kind of set out to do here, it seems, and then what he ended up doing with the actual first series. Great to see some JAE Lee art in black and white. So you can see a lot of his ink work, right? The splatter, the white medium that he's using. You know, what's going on, the actual story, who knows? Apparently he dreams about angels, so he sees this girl here. Whether or not these wings are symbolic lighting or her actual wings, I don't know. Great piece of artwork, though. As I said before many times, JAE Lee's always been really talented at drawing the ladies, and this is no exception here. Does a great job. And again, I just love all the techniques he's using here with the white splatter and the white medium for the contour of her crotch and the thighs and stuff. I think this looks great. Very, you know, he's mixing the elegant style he's kind of got with the fine line with a lot of the dirtier splattery style. And I think it works really well on this shot here. And then boom, he just reduces it down. So we get 4 pages, I guess the 4 last pages of that first kind of version of the Hellshock story. And again, I do feel all of this stuff here, the proportions, the inking is more representative of his prior style, which I guess he's trying to get away from now with Hellshock, using the photo reference backgrounds and stuff. You know, there's a bit more background than in his usual stuff here. So I do overall still prefer kind of the aesthetic that he's using here that I was a little bit more familiar with. Love this character here. You know, it's the only time we get him in silhouette here, but the look here kind of reminds me of if you've ever seen, oh, what is the name of that movie? Dector is the villain in it. He wears a mask and he kills people. Very similar to this, except, you know, the bottom of his face is covered and you can get a bit of his mouth there. What is that movie? Nightbreed. If you guys know that movie, Nightbreed. Kind of a cult classic. You kind of have to look for it, but I saw it as a kid and I always loved it. I love the aesthetic of it, the vibe of it, the Clive Barker-ness of it, right? It's a Clive Barker movie. And David Cronenberg actually plays the mass murderer who wears this kind of mask in Nightbreed. If you've never seen Nightbreed and you're into horror and maybe even this kind of aesthetic that we're getting here, very similar, I would check that out. I'm assuming JAE Lee probably looked and saw Nightbreed and took some influence from it. Could be wrong, but I definitely see some of that in some of his stuff. This was an interesting page in this comic. I know it appears in other books, but in case I don't see it in any of my other reviews, I'll just read through it because I think it's a good kind of marker for where Image was by 3 years past their creation, right? And kind of foreshadowing the fact that they're still going to be around today and doing creator-owned comics. So, you know, their goal back then hasn't changed that much, and a lot of what's said here comes to pass. And like I said, Image is still around today, and I think that in America, or at least in North America, the 3rd biggest publisher after Marvel and DC. So that's saying something. So Image, come on, admit it, you thought we'd be gone by now. A lot of people did, right? When they first started, they said they'll be done within a year. When we originally, let me start that again. When we originally announced our plans to form an alliance dedicated to economic and creative freedom, the industry experts and pundits had a field day. They predicted we couldn't possibly last more than a year. Too young, too impulsive, too naive. They'll never find the self-discipline necessary to make sound business decisions. And with 2020 hindsight, we'll be the first to admit a few of those predictions came true. We did make some boneheaded decisions. I like the fact that they're actually admitting that, but having jumped into something they hadn't done before, it just makes sense that they would make some of those mistakes, right? But despite all the pratfalls, Image Comics survived. We just entered the 3rd year of our revolutionary alliance. We're not so impulsive and naive anymore. In fact, we're stronger than ever, revitalized, refreshed, and rededicated to making the best comics on Earth. I guess at this point they are. The comics bubble is bursting or about to burst here, so things will change a little bit there, but still, Image still around today, right? We never lost sight of the reason why we banded together, to refuse to follow in the footsteps of all the legendary creators who had their characters taken from them. I would say this comment is true, but a little bit misleading in the sense that, the legendary creators didn't have their characters necessarily taken away from them. That was just the way comics were published. And if you created new characters, you knew the company was going to take them away from you and keep the copyright and the trademarks and all that stuff. That's just the way things were. So it's not like they were, fooled into having the characters taken away from them. That was just the way things were. Not saying it's right, obviously, but it's a little funny to say that their characters were taken from them. I guess technically you could still say that. Morally, I guess they were. We're free to pursue our own visions and dreams. We've demonstrated to every young superhero cartoonist that you don't have to sell yourself short. We've changed the nature of work-for-hire comics by nurturing our own young talent and rewarding them extremely well for their labor on our creations. That is true. We encourage them to work towards the day they create their own worthy characters, leave our nest, and form their very own versions of Image Comics, or at least their very own creator-owned character for Image Comics like JAE Lee is doing here. In 1992, we set out to institute permanent changes in the comics industry, and I do think they were successful in that. The young creators of tomorrow will benefit from the battles we waged against the large publicly held corporations, and we couldn't be prouder of that. Image sets the trends, and the rest of the industry follows. I would agree with a lot of that too, and that's definitely paid off today, where you are aware now, if you work for Marvel, DC, and you create characters, that they will own the trademark and will be taken away from you. Well, that's why a lot of people, tend to save their good ideas, or what they consider their good ideas, for creator-owned comics by other publishers, including Image, of course. There's been no memorable characters that I can think of, really, very few that have been created in the last 25 years for Marvel or DC. And there are some, and people could argue that, but really, the lasting characters, at least from Marvel, that I can remember were created by Rob Liefeld, be it Cable or Deadpool. Other than that, since then, I can't really think of anyone else who's had, a character that's been very successful, that was created by a creator and, licensed and trademarked by Marvel. There are some right here and there that are created, but I just feel like the artists are not throwing in their best ideas for stuff that they will not own the trademark and the copyright for, which I can understand. That's why we're still here and will continue to be for a long, long time, and that certainly has come to pass, as well as Image Comics, again, still around 30 odd plus years later. Boof, that was a funny comic. Again, I was at 13, I was just still riding the Image wave, and I was about to start being more selective with my books, but because this was a McFarlane book, I did buy the first few issues of Boof, and this is the period where I'm still buying stuff and quickly deciding, okay, I got to drop some of these books. So Hellshock was one. Boof was definitely another one where I bought the first 1, 2, maybe 3 issues, and then, realized, why am I buying this stuff? I don't actually enjoy it, right? And kind of after that stuck to the core kind of Image titles like Pit and Spawn. We've talked about this ad before, right? In my profit reviews, you can look those up on the archives, the Stephen Platt stuff. Maybe the only work up to this point that Joe Madureira had done for Image. Eventually he did Battle Chasers there, but it was for kind of Image imprint. But a cool Joe Madureira image inked by Art T-Bear, so it's got a bit of the kind of Wildstorm aesthetic on the Joe Madureira drawing. And then this is a funny ad because it says Spawn 24, Kids and Crack, Spawn and Salmon Twitch. Which one of these don't belong together? Answer, find out in Spawn 24. Answer, you're not going to find out in Spawn 24. Sometimes, Tom McFarlane would get ahead of himself and solicit issues with plot points that eventually he didn't actually get to, or decided to change his mind, do something else. So I know for sure, I'll read the description here, but this is not what happens in Spawn 24. If I remember correctly, Spawn 24 has overkill up here, and it's basically just a fight between Spawn and overkill. Their second kind of second round bout. Spawn goes about saving some of the local school kids with the help of his new ally, Simon Twitch. They're not allies quite yet at this point either. The knowledge of Spawn's existence has positive and negative ramifications for those that live around him. Find out in this emotional story of Spawn trying to justify his existence to the local folks, while at the same time, that's not one word, so a bit of a typo there, battling the crack dealers. So this part here, trying to justify his existence to the local folks and the hobos he lives with and stuff, that's kind of true. But the crack dealer thing is not in that issue at all. Also, a lead to the Angela miniseries by Neil Gaiman and Greg Capullo coming later in the year, almost monthly from Image. So I don't think that was in there either. I could be wrong, but I certainly don't remember it. So here's what they're using to advertise issue 2 of Hellshock. We'll find out next week when I do my Hellshock issue 2 review if this is the actual cover or if they're again kind of going with that photo manipulated kind of aesthetic that we have on the cover of issue 1 here. So there you go, guys. That is my review of Hellshock issue number 1. If you're still watching and you're still subscribed, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It really helps the channel out, helps us grow, helps us attain the next milestone. We're really close now, not far off from the 500 subs, where YouTube eventually, when we hit that milestone, starts helping us out with the algorithm and getting us out there to other people who hopefully are interested in the channel and are into comic books just like we are. So everyone out there, thank you so much for your support and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.